Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome back to Miami Total Football. It's the day after Inter Miami's playoff run came to an end before it ever really got started. An ugly 3-0 defeat to Nashville SC, fellow expansion side Nashville SC at Nissan Stadium in Nashville, Tennessee, doomed Inter Miami for an elimination. And for Inter Miami, obviously, now this season is done and dusted. There's no more games in 2020. They'll next play again in 2021. And they'll be dwelling on this one for a good bit because this was an ugly performance, a poor performance from the entire group. Almost no player had a good performance in this one. Very few exceptions in that regard. And, it started from the tactical standpoint. Diego Alonso had a rough outing in terms of his tactics. He went with a formation that tried to make up for how shorthanded Inter Miami was. They were without Leandro Gonzalez Pires, Gonzalo Higuain, and Federico Higuain. Those were the three regular rotation players, or the regular lineup players that were, or the regular roster players to better fit Federico Higuain's role. Those were the three players that were out due to positive COVID-19 tests, and that combined with Andres Reyes' yellow card suspension from the last game of the regular season left Inter Miami a bit short-handed. So Diego Alonso maybe overthought his game plan, maybe overthought his tactics going into this one, because he came out in a 5-1-2-2 formation. Essentially, you could call it a 5-3-2, but it was playing more like a 5-1-2-2. Very narrow in terms of the midfield and the attack. He had Rodolfo Pizarro, Juan Agudelo up top on the forward line. On the second line of the midfield, he had Luis Morgan and Blaise Matuidi playing centrally, so as interior midfielders, not wide. Luis Morgan wasn't playing wide in this one, at least not to start. And behind them, they had Will Trapp blanketing the back five. Now, obviously, there were wing backs in this formation that were supposed to provide some width and help generate some things in the attack from those positions as well as in the press, but it just never really worked out all that well. As I broke down on SBIsoccer.com today, the five in the attack, or the five more advanced players, would press high up the field, as were Diego Alonso's instructions, but the five at the back kind of stayed in deeper positions, and that just created a big space, or big spaces in the middle, and that's where Nashville SC found the ability to play through and eventually got their first goal. It was a heck of a shot, great shot from Randall Leal, but he has the ability or the luxury to take that shot because he has no pressure on him in that area of the field. Obviously, you could criticize AJ De La Garza there for not stepping up, but you could also criticize Blaise Matuidi for not getting back and helping out to put pressure on the dribbler. But Inter Miami went down after 14 minutes. Heck of a finish there from the Costa Rican. But again, Inter Miami just never really had much of a response. It was just a very disjointed effort. Again, lines were a bit all over the place, a little too disorganized, a little too spaced out, and just too out of sync. And you could see it in different moments of the game, how the back line would be in certain positions while the other team, while the attacking part of the team was high up the field, and they just never moved as a unit as you need to when you're playing, regardless of your style. Most teams want to keep the lines tight so that you don't give your opponent that much space to play in, but Inter Miami wasn't able to do that. Here, they struggled pretty mightily, and they ended up going down 2-0 off a questionable penalty kick call that Hani Mukhtar earned off of a foul from John McCarthy. There was contact in the box. That has to be said. There was contact. Maybe a bit soft call, but when you see the contact, it's going to be most likely a penalty kick that stands once that's what's called on the field. It gets converted in a kind of cruel fashion too, because it gets shot down the middle by Mukhtar as McCarthy dives to his right. And McCarthy had stayed rooted to his line on the last two penalty kicks he faced, and there was criticism from myself and others included about him standing there instead of diving. This time he dives, doesn't stay in the middle, and he gets scored on. Just a bit of a cruel twist there and just kind of depictive of the luck that Inter Miami has had a bit this year. But overall, this was a poor showing, a very poor showing. I would say Mikey Ambrose was the best player, and predominantly because he was one player that maybe didn't make a significant mistake. Everyone else across the board had a rough outing. And Diego Alonso touched on his tactics after the game and explained what he was looking to do, but why it didn't work out and what eventually led him to switching to the more familiar 4-2-3-1 formation that helped get Inter Miami back into the flow of the game a little bit.
Bueno, nosotros intentamos, con los jugadores que teníamos, hacer un planteamiento como generalmente lo hacemos, tratando de presionar la salida, pero apenas comenzó el partido, nos convirtieron en el gol. Creo que el cambio táctico más importante en el fútbol es el gol. Creo que el gol que ellos tuvieron al comenzar el juego cambió un poco la tónica del partido, se sintieron todavía con mucho más confianza para poder jugar y nosotros sufrimos de ese golpe y recién creo que pasado los últimos 15 minutos del primer tiempo nos pudimos acomodar y hacer un partido más parejo, ¿no? Y nos costó un tiempo, nos costó 30 minutos poder estar en la eliminatoria.
Now, while there will be plenty of criticism for Diego Alonso and his tactics and his overthinking of the lineup, given that the team was shorthanded and that they didn't get to train much over the past 2 weeks because of the COVID-19 test that popped up within the team, there was more to this loss than just that. And one of them was that the star players just didn't step up. The star players that were available didn't step up. And that is Blaise Matuidi, who was the captain for this game, and Rodolfo Pizarro. Now, there are circumstances as well for them individually, and this loss is not solely on them, but when you have the stature and the class and the quality and experience that those two players have, you've got to step up and help lead the team and try to guide the team and give them a fighting chance, raise the level of the group, of the collective, and they didn't do that. They were far from that. They were probably the opposite of that. Blaise Matuidi's involved in 2 of the goals given up by failing to track back, especially on the third one where he shows just kind of a lack of effort, a lack of desire to try to help close down Dax McCarty, who ends up slotting the third goal in the 57th minute, just as Inter Miami was enjoying its best moments of play and starting to finally create some things in the final third. But that was on Blaise Matuidi. Left something to be desired there for sure, and something that they're probably gonna look at on the game film and say that needs to be corrected. That can't be the effort you get from your experienced central midfielder, your box-to-box center midfielder that's won a World Cup, that's played for Juventus and at the highest levels in Europe. Now, for Pizarro, he was a non-factor in the attack, and what's more, he lost the ball twice. He was dispossessed or lost possession of the ball on 2 different occasions, and that was immediately preceding 2 goals, or the first goal and the penalty kick call that led to the second goal. So Pizarro was also invisible in this one. And again, this is not just on them. Almost the entire team played poorly here, and it just wasn't good enough collectively, individually, tactically. Overall, it was just a poor performance. And AJ De La Garza touched on all of those things after the match.
Exactly what's happened throughout our year. On the defensive side of the ball, we're not good enough at pressing and stopping shots. And on the flip side, I looked up at the scoreboard one time and we had 9 shots. They had 3 shots and they had 3 goals and we had 0. So on both sides of the ball, we have to do better. And that just comes with training and being better. We got nobody to blame but ourselves. I think a lot of guys can say they didn't live up to what they came here to do, unfortunately.
Now, those weren't the only interesting comments De La Garza had on this one. He was very frank, very candid and honest in his assessment, not only of the game, but of the season. He said he didn't want to offer up excuses for why things played out the way they did, not only on Friday night, but over the course of 2020. Of course, he had taken into consideration so many things like the global pandemic, players not coming in until later, but he did say that there is a lack of communication, and that's something that I've thought of and I've brought up at different points in the season, mostly during the first half of the season. I remember asking Luis Morgan during an interview about it, but the team said that they were fine with that regard, that there was communication despite there being language barriers. But AJ De La Garza made it clear last night that those are issues that the team is having. And now that's not necessarily the predominant issue for why Inter Miami hasn't played anywhere close to where it wants to be or needs to be, but it's certainly at least a minor issue, and something that, when added to everything else, just doesn't help the cause.
We have to do better. The communication has to do better. The language barriers have to be better. Too many guys don't speak Spanish. Too many guys don't speak English. And that leads to not communicating on the field. So,
one other thing I'll touch on in this game was the team's attitude, especially after the second goal. You could kind of see in the players' body languages, especially Rodolfo Pizarro when he was trying to appeal the penalty kick and trying to get referee Ismael Elfath to go to VAR, that they just seemed defeated. They just seemed like they knew there was no chance for them to get back into this game, that they didn't believe that they had a chance. Even though the match was still there, even as poorly as they were playing, they still could have gotten themselves back into the game. Matias Pellegrini had one of the best opportunities after coming on midway through the first half, or after the 33rd minute mark, when Diego Alonso switched to the more familiar 4-2-3-1. But this was an early second half shot, and Matias Pellegrini fires it over the crossbar on the volley effort. Has to put that one in, have to give your team a chance there. But it just illustrates the overall course of 2020 for Inter Miami. Just not good enough in both facets. Again, something AJ De La Garza touched on after the match.
Like I said, we just were not good enough for a lot of reasons. But you hear coaches sometimes say, I don't want to make excuses, and then they name excuses. I'm not going to do that. I put it on my shoulders and the guy's shoulders that we just weren't good enough, and we weren't prepared well enough to win the game tonight.
Now I'm going to go back to what I just said about the team's attitude and how the team seemed defeated and just like they didn't have much fight in them anymore. You saw it at different points, not only from Blaise Matuidi, but from other players that maybe you normally wouldn't expect it to. Luis Morgan on the third goal maybe could have had a better effort, maybe could have tried to track back and run and help put pressure on Dax McCarty, but didn't really make that run, didn't try to put that energy, didn't make that kick things into second or third gear to really try to help the team just kind of jog back. And again, this is not on just one player. This is an overall ugly display from most of the collective. Again, Ambrose might be the one player that saves himself in this one. Maybe a couple of the bench players that came in and did what they could in their limited duty. But overall, a dud of a performance, an emphatic, sloppy showing to end what was a frustrating and disappointing season. So what's next for Inter Miami? Well, they'll head into the offseason surely ready to do a lot of introspection. There's so much that needs to be corrected and addressed, because while this was a playoff team in name and in the standings and in the stat book, this wasn't really a playoff team. If we're realistically speaking, they scratched into the postseason as the 10th place team in the Eastern Conference on the last day of the regular season with a lot of outside help. So by and large, any other year, this would not have been a playoff team. Now, of course, there's the pandemic and a lot of things to take into account. I understand that, but just what they showed on the field was not playoff caliber, not even close to playoff caliber, even in MLS, which is very flattering in terms of how many spaces they give and how many playoff spots they give during the course of a normal season. So a lot for Inter Miami to address, a lot for them to think about and figure out. You can expect the roster to have some significant change. I expect at least a third of it to be changed, if not more, because this group just didn't have enough quality and it didn't fit what Diego Alonso wanted to do, and he couldn't figure out how to make best use of these players, and they couldn't adopt or adapt to the tactics he wanted. So a lot to think about for Diego Alonso, a lot to think about for sporting director Paul McDonough. Does Diego Alonso come back in 2021? I would guess as of right now, yes, because they've invested in him. They've invested in his view and his vision for this team. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they went about and made a change. I could see that, given how just rough the season went But I think they'll give him another chance. I think they'll give him at least another half season to try to correct things, another transfer window to try to bring in some more quality and maybe try to approach a season that's going to be a little bit more normal. But what did you think of Inter Miami's 3-0 loss to Nashville SC? Was it as bad as I think it was, or do you think it was not? Do you think it was better than that? Do you think they showed some positive things and you took away some positives from this one? Let me know in the comments section below. We're going to be back with more post-game and post-season coverage in the coming days and weeks, including overall player grades and team grades, player ratings for the totality of the season. We're going to analyze what needs to be addressed in terms of positions and in terms of tactics, and we'll touch on all of that in the coming days and weeks. So stay tuned to Miami Total Football for more of that. And as always, I'm Franco Panizo. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you back here soon.